Welcome to the Spirit Gathering teleconference. Today is June 16th, 2012. My name is Sally Ekaireb, and our topic this evening is metaphysical healing. We're so glad that you've joined us tonight for this program. We are recording this call so that people who could not be here tonight can listen in. Please press *6 to mute your line to help keep the line quiet for our recording. Let's take a moment now to get settled, to center ourselves, to let go of the events of this day and begin to enter the deeper, sacred space within ourselves. Now let us imagine that we are joining together, sacred heart to sacred heart, with every other person on this call right now. And let us imagine that we are joining together, sacred heart to sacred heart, with everyone who will be listening to the recording. Now let us set our intentions. May we deepen our connection with the divine. May this sharing serve each of us on our spiritual journey. May it serve our communities and the planet. And so it is. Tonight I chose for the topic metaphysical healing because that has been something very foremost in my life over the last few years. I work as a healer and a counselor in New York City, and probably more importantly, I have been very focused on the health of family members over the last few years, and particularly that of my mother. And as I had to deal with her pending death and the passing of my father, I found that I was affected at very deep levels. And what I found is that it was harder for me to keep the kind of harmony and balance in my life that I try and maintain. And as an effect of this, I was noticing changes in my emotional state, my mental state, and especially my physical state. And when I learned of the Church of Tzaddi, I was first introduced to metaphysical healing. And I read it, I absorbed parts of it, but I don't feel that I've really consciously tried to apply it to my life and healing work in a profound way. When I started searching for answers for the situation I was in, I decided to explore the Christian Science Church, partially because it was 4 blocks from where I live, and partially because there had been Christian scientists in my family as I grew up. And I had always understood God through the concept that God is love. Very simply, God is love. We didn't use that in any form to try and maintain health. I was not brought up according to the Christian Science faith, but there was something about it that was present because it had been in my grandparents' generation. And the other thing that intrigued me about the church was the fact that I had heard that Mary Baker Eddy had practiced homeopathy, and that is something that I have studied and practiced. And so my understanding of health and well-being very much originated from the work of Dr. Samuel Hahnemann. So one of the things that I looked at is, how does this all come together? How does it fit together? And I started reading Mary Baker Eddy's book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, and found it to be a profoundly moving and inspirational work for myself. And I also found that many of the ideas that she expressed resonated with ideas that I had received from reading Dr. Hahnemann's Organon of the Medical Art. And I think it's worthwhile to spend a minute discussing that, because I think when I first got into my studies, I wasn't exactly sure what healing meant and what is it that one wants to even heal. So in the Organon of Medicine, paragraph 9, Hahnemann writes, "In the healthy human state, the spirit-like force, autocracy, that enlivens the material orgasm as dynamis, governs without restriction, and keeps all parts of the organism in admirable, harmonious, vital operation, as regards both feelings and functions, so that our indwelling rational spirit can freely avail itself of this living, healthy instrument for the higher purposes of our existence." And in paragraph 11, he continues, "When a person falls ill, it is initially only the spirit-like autonomic life force or life principle everywhere present in the organism that is mistuned through the dynamic influence of a morbific agent inimical to life. Only life principle mistuned to such abnormality can impart to the organism the adverse sensations and induce in the organism the irregular functions that we call disease." When I first was taught this, it kind of confused me, because I had always understood disease as being a very material kind of misfunction, that something organically was wrong with the body. And what was stated here is that actually the functioning of the body actually was subsequent to another kind of disorder, a disorder that happened in a life force which was always present and animated the body, but was not a tangible substance. Well, when I read the work of Mary Baker Eddy, it followed the same thought process. And when I also read the work of Amy Keyes, I found great similarities in her writings as she states how thoughts are things, so that as we think, we produce and manifest different material things. And so I see this whole linkage here. And yet for me, it was like, okay, how do we work with that to heal ourselves and the people that come to us for healing? And in homeopathy, a lot of it is focusing on the manifestation of this disorder and trying to understand what's considered to be the central delusion. What I find really amazing about Mary Baker Eddy is that when she had her physical crisis and having an accident and falling on the ice, cracking her head, and basically being left for dead by her doctors, she went to her Bible and read and had a revelation. And through that connected with the Christ force. And in that merging with the oneness and the purity of the oneness, she basically became healed. And yet, as she reemerged into the public and received the negative information from the doctors, she would regress. And as she went back and forth from the Bible to the doctors, she came to realize that she could either agree with the doctors and might not make it, or she could stand on a different level of truth. And to me, this is a huge leap forward, because what it means is that as any individual stands in what she describes as divine laws of life, truth, and love, there is no possibility for disorder in the form of disease, because all is perfect. God, as the loving spirit, in principle, can only produce good and perfection. And we, as his idea and reflection, can only be perfect as well. To me, the challenge of this, because I can absorb it on an intellectual level, is to actually come to a point where it is a truth that resonates to the deepest core of my being. That it is so difficult for me to actually get and experience and know the full profoundness of truth of the fact that I am perfect. Because for my whole life, I have been told all the various ways that I was not perfect. And to me, this is one of the most critical aspects of the metaphysical healing, because one can claim to acknowledge this information, but it seems to me that there is a level that goes beyond just that intellectual declaration, that it has to resonate at the corporal level. And I remember being at Kripalu a couple years back at a program where this, I believe his name was Henry Grayson, did a program, and his means of dialoguing with people was to work with their inner truth. So very similar with this metaphysical healing. And he would do the arm testing to see if the statement made was true or not. So, for example, one would say, my name is Sally Ekaireb. And as such, I could hold my arm out and it would be strong. But if after that I said, my name is Mickey Mouse, no matter how hard I willed my arm to stay up, it would go down. In watching this demonstration he gave in dialoguing with the woman, she came from a foreign background and said that she believed that it was all right for her to marry the man of her choice, but that somehow after she had gotten married, she had become ill. When Mr. Grayson tested her, what he actually found is that she did not believe that as a truth. No matter how hard she worked, she could not keep her arm up. And for me, it was a demonstration of realizing how there can be a gap between what one believes to be true and what is an actual truth for the self. So for me, in working with the metaphysical healing, coming to this truth of love is all, that all is good, that God can only produce good in the world, is often a challenge. But I've tried to apply it in my work and in my life. And as I say, with my mother and her declining health, I use the practical information that I know as a trained healer and counselor. And I found that that was very helpful. But there was a point that what the doctors could provide, what I could provide, had its limitations. And ultimately what I found is what affected my mother even beyond that was the care that she received from the individuals that were with her on a day-to-day basis, and especially the periodic visits that I made. That invariably, the day before I arrived, my mother's spirits would lift, she would have more energy, and her whole demeanor would be energized. And this would persist until I would leave. And within a number of hours, it was like she would kind of go down a step. And so it was clear to me that there was something that I was providing for her that went beyond anything that was materially being given. The other thing that was incredibly healing for me as well as for her, I would say, is that by the end of her lifetime, because I had made such a conscious effort of really providing this loving, supporting kind of aura around her being, that we were able to break through many of the patternings that had gone on for the better part of our lives. And there was a level of completeness and just flow of pure love that existed at her end stage that was beyond what I had ever thought possible. And I definitely credit this to what I have absorbed in my studies of metaphysical healing. The other way that I've used it is in working with some of my clients. And I'd like to share a case that was particularly special to me. And this was a young girl, about 8 years old, who was brought to me because she was producing facial tics, grimaces, and starting with obsessive-compulsive disorder behavior. And she had been to both her pediatrician and several specialists who examined her neurological system and discussed behavior modification procedures with her. And when she came into the room with her mother and sat down, she was distinctly uncomfortable. And her face was grimacing. I could see the concerns that her mother had described to me. And I tried to just be with it and to be with her and to look beyond what I was actually physically seeing to see what was beyond the physical expression. And the first thing I said to this young girl was that I didn't know what her mother had told her about the work that I did, but I wanted to let her know that I worked differently than the other people who she had been to see, because I viewed her as being a very special individual person who was just perfect the way that she was, and that I wasn't looking for her to change in anything that she did. and that in fact I just loved her the way that she was. And I paused and I looked at her, and it was like an entire weight dropped off of this child. And she breathed more fully, and she came into herself in a really beautiful way. And what I noticed was that as the moments progressed, the facial tics subsided until by the end of our session, she was barely having any expression of them at all. So it was a really beautiful example of how being with the perfect being that she is was so much more powerful than focusing on the expression of a disturbance. And I also applied this actually very recently when I came out of my building with my dog Chance. And there was a little girl about 3 to 4 years old who was having what I would call a meltdown on the street with her father, who clearly didn't have an idea what his daughter wanted as she wailed in this extreme state of anger and grief. And my first response was to feel compassion for the child. And as I felt this, I noted that my heart center opened, and my heart ball started to run, and there was just this huge aura of love that came out. And my dog's a really slow walker and loves to sniff around, so I decided rather than trotting off to the park that I would just focus on being a channel of love for this child. And I repeated the thought that God loves you and holds you in his embrace. In about a minute, the child started to quiet down and drew her attention to Chance and me. She then walked over and knelt down and asked if she could pet Chance. We had what I call a little love fest, as dogs are so good at doing. And then we said our goodbyes, and her father came over and took her by the hand. And it was just an amazing transition from this extreme expression of a child who was out of control to one who was able to come back into their center of being. And it was just a beautiful thing to watch and experience. So the other thing that I wanted to share with you were some of the things that I've learned from studying the work of Mary Baker Eddy. And as I say, she discusses that God expresses the triune principle of life, truth, and love, and that there is no separation between divine intelligence and the man that we are. And one of the things that she separates is immortal man with the human man. And I find that this follows the Tzaddi tenet so much as we talk about that I am but the channel and the spirit within doeth the work. So we find that divine life, truth, and love is the action of divine spirit that removes the errors of the mortal mind. She also writes, Mary Baker Eddy, that immortal man was and is God's image or idea, even the infinite expression of the infinite mind. An immortal man is coexistent and co-eternal with that mind. And this to me was very important because I think as I grew up, I always felt separate from this foreign entity which had been called God in the religion that I had been taught. And it was a complete shift in my paradigm when I realize that God is ever present and He is eternal, and that Spirit not only pervades everything in this universe, but it pervades that of my physical body, because the Spirit within is a reflection of that God. And I think for me, that is one of the things that I struggle again to come to the truth about. That on some profound level, I get that it's true, and yet there are still these voices of memories which tell me a different story and which I have not removed from my thinking patterns yet. But I try and remind myself to make the conscious connection with God and to remember that all is perfect and perfect in its expression. I strive to stand upright, holding to the principles of life, truth, and love. I found that I've dealt with the challenges of these past few years, that one of the key elements that has supported me is just standing in my truth, of realizing that no matter how difficult the situation would be, that if I could stand in that I knew to be true, if that I knew to be the greatest expression of love that I could manifest, that was all I needed to do, and I could leave it at that. The other thing that I've learned from studying the work of Mary Baker Eddy, as she has studied and expressed the Bible and the works of Jesus Christ, is to demonstrate the virtues that exemplify the Christ consciousness. And I think that's where the compassion that I felt towards this child was so important. That very often in the stories that are written about, this was one of the first emotions that's described as it speaks about Jesus in the situations. The next thing I'd say is that for me, I work in my practice to go beyond observing and to perceive what is not shown, to listen to and hear that which is not said, and to sense and feel the non-physical, to follow the flow of energy and how it moves, expands, contracts, and stops. And perhaps most importantly is to be love and express love fearlessly and generously. And I think that's one of the things that I have very much learned within the Tzaddi community and the works of Mary Baker Eddy and being in the Christian Science community, is that very often the love of my household was very measured. And in a way, I have to sometimes stop and look at myself and say, is this what you truly want to express, or are you willing to give more? So as we described this conversation this evening, we spoke about the fact that metaphysical healing relates to the Christ consciousness that was demonstrated by not just Jesus of Nazareth, but also Buddha, Muhammad, and other great teachers. So what I'd like to do is open the program up so that people may discuss their experience, their thoughts about anything on this topic and coming from any of these various sources that may have contributed to their lives. So I'd like to please open the discussion at this time, and in order to join the conversation, you will need to push *6 to unmute yourself. So please.
I just want to say, Sally, this is Amy, that was a lovely talk. Thank you very much. Very, very inspiring.
Thank you.
I don't have a particular story to share, but I just wanted to appreciate what you've said.
Thank you. I think in response to you, what I'd like to say is how much I've appreciated the work that you have produced, particularly revolving around the triangles, because I do feel that the work with both network and out-of-network triangles has given me a direct experience of this kind of manifesting of love and rising into a higher consciousness. So thank you for that.
Yeah, Sally, I was very touched by some of the things you said, especially about with the children, because I work with children all the time, and absolutely I've had the same experiences. But I have had a thing where I was taking care of my mother for a few years now because she has Alzheimer's. And suddenly it was really difficult for me because I've been healing people for years, and then suddenly it was like personal. It was about my mother, and then it was about me getting sick from the stress of taking care of my mother. And I think that there's another whole level that we don't really sometimes think about as healers, but that's that we have to love ourselves. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to do. And for me, that was like a really, really big issue for the past couple of years. And that sometimes when we doubt, it's really because we doubt ourselves. And it's kind of hard sometimes just to heal yourself when it's easy to heal somebody else. And if you just stick with it and you really love yourself and you find that true love for yourself on the spiritual level, that all things are possible.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, this is Thomas Ayers.
Hi, Thomas.
I guess I'm curious. I guess I missed the name of the last person who spoke. I'm curious about how you actually did that work of coming to love yourself. How did you do that? Would you mind sharing some of your experience?
Yeah, it was hell. It took a lot of discipline, a lot of going like doubt. Like there were actually moments when I was like, oh, I'm not going to be a minister anymore, and I don't believe in any of this stuff. A lot of ups and downs. But I found when I got really, really down, I would just kept saying to myself, this isn't working. Like, when you're out of sorts, it's just not working. So you've got to reach for something else.
Mm-hmm.
And so then that would always bring me back to my spirituality. And I spent a lot of time reading, going back over a lot of old books and things that I just had on my shelf. I would just in times of despair, I would just grab any book and open it up. And of course, it would always open up to whatever I actually needed to see and hear.
Mm-hmm.
I went back and read a lot of Amy Key's things that she had written many, many years ago. And I just, it was a long, hard battle. But all of a sudden, if you just keep plodding, you just keep trying, you just keep holding on to what you know and what you believe. I mean, there were times when I just really thought everything I believed in was just untrue. But in those moments of despair, I would pull myself up again and realize that, no, there's always an answer. And if I could do it for somebody else, I could do it for myself. So it was really just a lot of self-discipline, telling myself that if I did it for others, I could do it for myself. But I'm not going to tell you it was easy, because it was not easy. It's been a long, hard road. But I realized that it was also served me very well. It served me, because there's nothing scarier than being sick yourself or watching a loved one being sick. And so, I don't know, all I can say is just don't give up. Just keep trying and trying. And then all of a sudden one day there's just this peace that just overwhelms me, and I just know that it's all okay. And that's the only way I know how to describe it. But there wasn't any one specific thing that I did that was wow. There's just a lot of ups and downs.
And you found that peace now?
Oh yeah. I feel so relieved now that it's like it's okay. It was just a lot of it was ego. That's another thing that I discovered. A lot of it was about ego. Like, oh my gosh, how can I call myself a healer? How can I call myself a minister and I can't even heal my own mother? It was like, so a lot of it was ego. I had to work a lot on that, and realize this is not about ego, and to really, get beyond that. But it was a lot of hard work, and I still have my moments where there's some days and I'm like, oh God, but it's so much easier now. It's just so much easier. Mm.
Well, thank you. And I would add to that with my situation, I too found that it was really essential that I spend time really every day with some meditation and some reading that brought me the kind of comfort that I needed. And this is really when I started seriously reading Mary Baker's Eddy book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. And there are just so many beautiful phrases that would sustain me. I know that there were many things I was going to read here, and then I thought it probably isn't good to just read from the book. But just if you read the preface, the first sentence of this book is, "To those leaning on the sustaining infinite, today is big with blessings." And I often think of that through the day now, that when something gets challenging, when, I'm starting to feel fearful or anxious about something, I think about leaning on that sustaining infinite and how my life will be big with blessings. And I so encourage anyone who has not gone through this kind of process with a parent, because I can't put into words the contribution that it's made to me as a person. I somehow feel, I guess the best way to put it, and I see this in the struggle with my daughter and myself, is that it's like my daughter is always trying to fill herself with love, and there's no way to fill that void. And at this point, I feel like I got it. That it doesn't matter that my mother has passed on. The love is here. And it will always be here for me. And the physical, corporal aspect, having left, doesn't affect it in the least. And that she is infinitely present with me and within me. And that is something I could not have said would be even a possibility for me a few years back. And it's clear that the evolution of my thinking process has allowed this, as she talks about, how everything comes from mind. So let me see, is there any other people that would like to contribute tonight to our discussion?
Amy, again, I'm finding what everybody is saying to be very impactful, and I'm grateful to everybody who's speaking and asking and sharing. I think it's a really beautiful expression that seems very grounded to me in the realities of our human life. It's good for me to hear all of your stories. It's very, very impactful. So thank you.
You're welcome. And, it is my hope that the people within the community can look at what it is to be metaphysical healers, because, I've been blown away with what I have read that Mary Baker Eddy achieved as a healer. That the stories of literally from raising the dead to, just being and praying with people, and, she just writes, it doesn't matter whether it's chronic illness or acute illness, cancer or whatnot, she just would go into her prayerful state and heal it all. And the testimonials and stories are really, really inspirational. So I think for me it awakened a real desire to look at, what one can do through the power of faith and through a greater conscious connection with spirit, and hopefully that will kind of translate outward into the greater consciousness.
I'd also like to add something else about working with my mother who has Alzheimer's, because I said this about ego. It was also because I had to come to a decision and a conclusion that this was her path. It wasn't mine. And that was really hard for me as a healer to just accept that my mother was choosing to have Alzheimer's. And once I accepted that's what was going on with her, then I was able to just be there and assist with that. She's still alive and she still has Alzheimer's, but the days are so much more peaceful now. It's because I'm not trying to constantly change her path. I'm not trying to fix it. I'm not trying to mend it. I'm just accepting it, and I'm just there for her in the way I can be there for her, which, like you said, Sally, was love. It's all about love, and not really trying to butt my head against the wall every day, trying to make it go away, but to accept and just to keep saying thy will be done. And that's made it a lot easier for me, too.
Yeah. And I found my mother had dementia, but she clearly understood who we were and could get through on most things in life and all. And yet at her end stage, when she was no longer talking and her eyes were kind of in either closed or like an REM motion and all, it was amazing to me the absolute connection that we had, that I could sit. And in the last few days, I would sit and read the Bible to her and just hold her arm. And it was like I was reading to a child or something, and it's very difficult to put into words the fact that even when she couldn't really speak, it was as if she was talking to me. And, this is what I was trying to get at, of the idea of how things are transmitted without actual words. And, that there is this energy and expression and connection that is so incredibly forceful when we tune into it. So I think we're going to have to close now, and I would like to thank each of you for joining us for this Spirit Gathering teleconference. The call will be archived at the following number, which is 712-432-1085 with the access code 990322 $. We hope you'll join us for our next Spirit Gathering on the topic of, it will be on June 20th at 5:30 Pacific Standard Time with Nancy Rubin, who's both a reverend and a medical doctor, and she will discuss transmission, how energy, information, and different states of consciousness get transmitted without using speech. So a very nice follow-up for tonight's discussion. So we invite you to invite others who might enjoy these calls. These calls are hosted by Tzaddi, a spiritual educational organization founded in California in 1964. Tzaddi welcomes, nurtures, and supports people in celebrating and more directly experiencing their relationship with the loving presence of the divine. Our programs are open to people of any race, color, or national or ethnic origin. Visit www.tzaddi.org to learn more about our work and click on payments if you'd like to make a tax-deductible donation. We will close now with thanks and a blessing. Thanks to founders Amy Keyes and Dorothy Blackmere, who started our Metaphysical organization. Thanks to all of you who have been a part of our community tonight. And thanks to the divine who support us always, and even when we are not aware of it. And I'd like to close with the following blessing, which comes from Numbers, chapter 6, 24 and 25. May the Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make his face shine upon thee, and be gracious unto thee. May you all rest in peace and harmony of love tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Good night.
Good night.